animators and artists, and welcome to this Toon Boom interview. Today's guest is John Evershed, the head of High Concentrate, a company specializing in the research, packaging, development, and sale of adult animation. He was previously the founder and CEO of Mondo Media, where he launched and programmed the Mondo channel on VRV, and also generated over 6 billion, wait, is that billion with a B?
Billion with a B, baby.
Views on YouTube. So we invited John onto today's stream to talk about his findings from his upcoming white paper on adult animation. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Toon Boom Mike.
So to start off, let's get definitions out of the way. What do we mean when we talk about adult animation?
Well, in this paper, I define adult animation as series, usually 11s and 22s, not movies. The grayness comes in when we start talking about anime. Right now, the paper does not extensively cover anime. It does cover some hybrid anime crossovers, Western produced anime or anime produced around Western IP. And I actually anticipate this is the second edition of the white paper. I published one roughly a year ago, but I'm anticipating that by the third paper, I will actually be covering off anime because the lines are continuing to blur between Western produced anime and anime producers producing IP producing content around IP, Western based IP. So it's specifically 18 to 34, so adult animation. And I cover off everything from the SVODs to the broadcasters to cablers and some digital.
Yeah. So back in 2019, and what a simpler time that was, your report counted 50 adult animated series in production, and that seemed like a lot. By 2020, how many adult animated series were you counting in this report?
Almost completely doubles the amount of upcoming series for 1834 as adult animated series has literally doubled since last year.
And where did all this come from? Like, why has there been so much more adult animation over the past year?
I think there's several factors that go into that. One is that the streamers have caught on to, oh, wait a sec, this is a hack for getting at 18 to 34s. It's less expensive than high quality scripted programming. But it does the same trick, and it can be even more enduring. I'm thinking of like BoJack Horseman or something, where these series tend to stay on air longer than live action series. So it's really, I think, the streamers, and it's not just obviously last year. If you think about it, right, it was kind of only Netflix and Hulu, I guess, at the time. But you've got all these newcomers, in particular HBO Max. It's been very aggressive, as well as all of anybody trying to reach 18 to 34s in general has sort of come to terms with, oh, I need at least 1, 2, or 3, adult animated series if I want to hit this demographic. And I would include players like, AMC or TBS, these kind of folks that all have at least a couple of animated series in their lineup. So I think it's those factors, but there's also this kind of what I'm calling the great adult animation boom in the white paper, which is this explosion of non-comedy genre animation that I'll get into here, I'm sure, at part of this conversation. So it's a shift in taste in terms of consumers. It's a shift in terms of appetite for adult animation in terms of the streamers reaching those consumers, and just this overall trend towards non-comedy genre animation.
So one of the things that you mentioned was that this is sort of a strategy to attract more viewers in the 18 to 34 demographic. Would you say this demographic has gotten more difficult to reach through traditional TV?
Well, they've abandoned statistically, 15%. There's 15% decline in viewership from last year, over the course of this last year, and that trend has been going on for some time now. I know anecdotally from my own research here in my house that my kids do not go and watch, broadcast or cable. They just simply don't. The only thing they're watching on there are sports, and that's about it. You know, the occasional scripted programming, but in general, they are, well, honestly, they're consuming, more video games than anything. That is by far and away the biggest pastime for that demographic. But in terms of television consumption, it's going to be on the streaming services.
Do you feel it's largely because of the fact that linear TV is largely ad supported?
No, I think it's on demand. That they're so used to consuming their media when they want it, how they want it, and I think that the streamers are just better suited to that. Now, of course, all the cable guys and everything sort of do it, but it's not their primary format. Although I'm guessing that now that they've consumed media without advertising, it seems really disruptive and like painful to watch. I think for anybody that's grown accustomed to having no ads. Although you know who's really coming on strong are all the ad-supported AVODs, not the SVODs. All those the AVOD services have all come along quite a bit because they're free. And if you're in college and you have no money, that's probably what you're going to be watching.
Yeah, many reviewers are more animators and storyboard artists than on the business side of the industry. So could we break down some of the acronyms like AVOD and SVOD?
AVOD is advertising video on demand, so ad-supported service that you would consume, when on a service rather than cable or broadcast. Cables, broadcasts are the four major networks. Cable is cable. SVODs are subscription video on demand, and that would be paid for services like Netflix or HBO Max or Disney Plus or Hulu or Amazon.
So in terms of all of these players, who do you say are currently the most aggressive buyers of adult animation, and what is it that they're looking for when they listen to a series pitch?
Well, in the case of Netflix, who is the most aggressive buyer by quite a bit, right? They've locked up. They have a first look on all the output from Titmouse, which is arguably the biggest studio servicing the adult animation category. They have built their own studio, and they're locking up key talent. And as a result, they have probably, by my count, at least 22 announced projects that are in development or production. And the makeup of the Netflix series, there's a huge amount of video game based properties that they're doing anime based TV series based on the video game, these popular video games, and that's a huge change, right? From last year, there's literally only one, that was Castlevania, that I can think of offhand. There's literally a dozen of those in production at the moment. So Netflix is going after video games. They have a real appetite for anime. They have a specific person dedicated to figuring out anime, and they're working in Japan. They're locking up output from studios. They're doing crossover stuff with folks like Powerhouse, and they're the guys behind Castlevania. But there's several new series coming from Powerhouse anime series. So that's another big focus. So video games, anime, of course, comedy. They'll continue to do that, and I'd say it's roughly a third at the moment. Comedies, anime, and they least focus on comedy, I guess, is probably how I describe Netflix. And then the next one is HBO Max. It has about 16 new series coming up, and they're sort of they're going for kind of IP that has pre-existing footprints for the most part. Some originals. It's sort of, I don't know that it's quite as coherent of a plan maybe as Netflix. And then the next is Fox, right? The broadcaster Fox. They're really, there's 5 on-air series at the moment. There's at least a dozen And they tend to obviously gravitate towards the family sitcom, um, writing teams that are really seasoned, voice actors that are, top tier, recognizable talent. So they that's their sort of bias. Although they're starting to kind of loosen up a little bit too. They've got like an upcoming uh, uh, mystery thing. They've got a new series coming from Dan Harmon, which I think will be pushing them into new territory. Because if you think about Fox, almost exclusively now, it's family sitcoms, and part of the what I talk about in the paper is that the family sitcoms, I just don't know, like they had success obviously with Bob's Burgers, but how much can you push that? Like how much does the world need one more animated family sitcom? And I'm not so sure that it does. And I think they know that. And so they're trying to widen the lens out on what they're looking for. So those are the top three players, I think, that I would point at.
Yeah. So your report covers the past year, but from your perspective, what has the
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? One thing that's kind of interesting is Adult Swim has been really quiet
hmm,
about how much they have on order, even though arguably they've got the most on air of all the players in the adult animation space. So they're kind of, I can't, they're going through some management changes, and I can't tell if it's just this sort of inexorable decline of cable that is kind of behind it all. Like, is it really that all the energy in these big, silos like the HBO Maxes and that kind of thing is just, at the expense of the cable channels that are in the same family of companies, So I think that I think it's conceivable that Adult Swim could become a sub brand on HBO Max that is and they become kind of like a studio theater in a way.
yeah.
That I think that's sort of possible, and they're not the only ones. Like this will happen with a lot of these vertically integrated companies, because all the emphasis will be on their streaming service and making sure they get that $15 a month out of the consumer. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were starting to say
No,
that.
that's actually a really good point. And Adult Swim has been making some of the weirdest stuff that I've seen, and amazing weird stuff. Like Dreamcore LLC was one of these shows that I hadn't even heard about. But I was talking to an animator who was working on that project, and it's like this rotoscoped mix of live action and then turns into this like animated magical realism fantasy thing. It's amazing to see how experimental and strange some of the content they're putting out is.
And that's been their legacy, right? Is that sort of irreverent, quirky, offbeat stuff, and um, it's niche, right? So it should arguably work on the streamers, right? If it's if you're really, I don't know though, whether you know they stole the crown right from Viacom, because back in the day, MTV with the Liquid TV and Beavis and Butthead and that kind of thing, they were the sort of groundbreaking innovators in terms of breaking away from the model of the Simpsons and the family sitcom and everything, and now now they again they've sort of hit peak. They've hit peak Adult Swim with Rick and Morty at the very same time that their audience is abandoning their primary way that they consumed Rick and Morty. Like Rick and Morty has rode the decline in cable out to the streamers. It's sort of like this bridging series into the streamers.
Yeah, I think Archer's also fallen into a similar pattern too,
Yeah,
where a
like
lot of people discover that show through their appearance on streamers.
yes, yeah, yeah. It's a
So
fair. It just strengthens my this idea that it's going to be all about the streamers. I mean, one big development in this past year, right, was that HBO Max sold off Crunchyroll. HBO Max, sorry, Warner Media sold off Crunchyroll, and I thought that's really interesting, because I was like, well, why would you do that? And the only thing I could think of is they wanted to service the debt and for the merger, and then kind of focus that money somewhere else in their vision for what is what defines anime, because I still see anime playing a big role. But I have to be really honest with you, I'm not quite clear on what was behind all that. Like, what was the thinking to sell off that asset? It had 3 million paying subs. It was working, you know. But I still come back to that these big silos, they're going to want to concentrate on those silos, and it's about consolidating everything around them.
Yeah.
They're big.
Why don't we talk about anime for a second? So, anime is sort of this all-encompassing term for animation from Japan, and there are certain styles that we pick up on and think about as anime. When did you feel that Western audiences started really embracing anime, and when did it get big for Western studios to start producing anime of their own?
Well, you know, it's been a gradual trend towards increasing amount of anime that was available to consumers, you know, here in the US. And I think the Japanese have gotten more sophisticated with their anime over time. You know, it used to be fairly rudimentary. Now you know, they're really ambitious, some of these projects. And I think that that it's playing to this overall trend that I'm seeing, which is away from comedic, strictly comedic, you know, animation, because that's how Americans perceived their animation, and that's because we started with Disney, and then The Simpsons arrived, and that sort of changed the definition of what is, you know, animated comedy. But they were the first ones to kind of move beyond that definition of it, and there's clearly an audience and an appetite for it, and they built that into a $26 billion industry. 13 billion of that is domestic in Japan, 13 outside of Japan. And just to put that as an order of magnitude, like, I think the current market for adult animation in the 1.5 billion, maybe 2 billion, something in that. So you can see that the difference between the sizes of these two businesses, but it means that there's a tremendous amount of headroom here for growth in non-comedy genre animation, horror, sci-fi, you know, even romance, that kind of thing that the Japanese have been doing for a while here. So they've been kind of filling a need and getting out ahead of everybody. But again, part of the thesis of the white paper is that Western studios, I'm thinking of Powerhouse, for example, right? The guys behind Castlevania and Says Manos, and they got a couple of upcoming big anime announced projects. Those guys have met with success because they were inspired by that, clearly, right? And so they started making this kind of anime inspired stuff. In the paper, I have a word for it. I've coined a term. I don't know if I can get everybody to adopt it or not, but it's gaibume, which means outside anime, because it's anime. It's anime-esque. It's inspired by anime, but it's created by Western studios. There's not really a word for it. And I think there needs to be, because I think that it's going to become this sort of like non-comedy genre animation is going to become, I think, an even bigger category than comedy, because comedy has built-in limitations when you try to export it. I know this from my own experience. I've had libraries of animated comedy produced here in the US, TV series like Gary and His Demons is a good example, right? Like, that's a comedy that aired on Sci-Fi here. It was on Verve. But if I try to go sell that outside the US, especially to a non-English speaking country, it's just like, it doesn't make any sense to them. They don't even know what we're talking about. So it's not like a show that exports that well. Whereas if that was a pure genre thing, like maybe it was a pure horror, I think that stuff exports better. It's kind of easier to export, and all the movie guys have figured out that kind of stuff, right? Like, it's hard to export comedies internationally, but it's easier to export superhero movies because they're easier for international audiences to understand. So I think that the growth here with non-comedy genre stuff is going to be like super, super interesting, and like literally double, triple the like we've seen the volume change just in this last year, right? We've gone from 50 to 100. I wouldn't be surprised if we were sitting here talking about 200 series, like it's that level of growth. But not all of them will work, right? Like it's one of the things I'm worried about right now is that there is so much new stuff here that didn't exist, last year. Is there enough production capability? Is there enough talent to execute on all that? This is where I think a lot of international studios, I don't know how many international folks are on this call, but I think international studios will have a role in servicing this growth, because I know for a fact that LA is tapped out, and it tends to be a little insular, right? Like it tends to be clubby, and people are buying and selling in LA, and it's LA-based studios and everything. But I think that the only way that this market can grow is through the participation of international players in the adult animation category. And they historically haven't been that active. If you look at who produces the vast majority of adult animation, it's not like kids animation, right? Kids animation, you've got especially countries like Canada, France, huge contributions to those markets, but not the case so much in adult. Like it's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, I love that you bring it up, because that was a big point in your white paper last year.
Yeah.
Was that there are only so many studios that specialize in adult animation.
Yeah.
What are some of the reasons why a studio that produces TV for kids might have difficulty producing adult animation?
It's cultural, it's voice, it's if you're trying to produce for kids, you probably that's something that it's important to you, and it's how you think about your creative and everything. And so you get into these patterns about how you think about developing shows and things like that. It's not that you can never make the break or some won't. It's just that culturally, I think even from a brand standpoint, I think it's hard for studios to take on like an adult themed project when like all the people are there because they're attracted to something that's beautiful about making stuff for kids. So I think it's cultural. It's there's also a phenomenon going on right now, where in the US there's a pretty big writing community that people can tap into that haven't been doing animation up until now. Like if you look at those 50 new series, I'd even argue that outside of the comedies, all the non-comedy stuff is being written by people coming from live action, dramatic series and genre series.
Or comics.
Or comic. Well, yeah, there's comic inspired, but I don't know if they're the comic book writers that are actually writing the long form series. My thinking is like if you're a foreign studio, your best bet would be to team up with qualified writers that are experienced in doing genre live action to take adult stuff to market, rather than kind of relying on your in-house creative teams to like develop shows from the ground up, because those tend to not work. They don't have enough. They're hard to sell because the writing talent isn't known for making the kind of stuff that you want to, if it's adult. So I think it's sort of like that sort of combination of factors that makes it hard for children's studios to get involved in adult animation. It's not impossible, right? I mean, some will make the jump.
I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that when like an adult animated series is announced, they do make a big deal out of the showrunner, right? The showrunner is someone that they really want to get publicity for.
And that's the right thing in a way, right? For stuff that's written, particularly, you do get that sort of, like, that was the great thing about Adult Swim, is that you can get this more quirky or irreverent voices coming out of Adult Swim's system that were not necessarily big brand name. It's like it was like they had their own farm system in there, in effect, right, to sort of groom the next showrunners. That's kind of, I think, kind of going away, and it really, when you take a product to market nowadays, it really has to be like qualified writer with credits, and deep credits and voice talent attached and the whole shebang, like with a ribbon around it, in order to get a show sold in.
Yeah. So your report covers this past year, but from your perspective, what has the landscape of adult animation looked like over the past decade? How did we get here?
Well, maybe if I could just back it up a little bit more and sort of say, like okay, we talked about the family sitcom on Fox and Family Guy and The Simpsons, and then you had that moment where we talked about already about MTV sort of said, okay, wait, this stuff kind of works for young adults like Beavis and Butthead and Daria and Clone High and that kind of stuff, right? Oh, this stuff works. Viacom kind of figured that out, but then they somehow, I don't know how they lost that mantle, because Cartoon Network was sitting around going like, oh shoot, we need to keep our ratings up after 10 o'clock at night. What are we going to do? Oh, I know. Let's just do an adult animation block. That's easy. So they gave them a few bucks, and it was really a few bucks. Like, it was very low budget kind of effort. And Adult Swim scaled up into the largest cable channel for 18 to 34s consistently, year over year over year. Still is to this day. And so you get to this place where, like we were talking about Rick and Morty, kind of the crossover into and you have BoJack Horseman arrive, right, on Netflix, and all the signals went off on Netflix, like, oh shit, this is the great hack to get at 18 to 34 as adult animation. It's cost less than live action stuff. It's very kind of commercially viable because you can build an ancillary build businesses around it, everything else. So I think Netflix kind of looked at it and went like, oh shoot, we're doubling down on this, and we can go head to head here with the likes of Adult Swim to pull these 18 to 34s in, right? So they could afford to be a little bit more flexible than maybe cablers could. In terms of doing quirky, kind of smarter written stuff, like just kind of BoJack kind of set that pace. So we're now in this streamer phase where you got comedies and stuff like that are working, but we're about to really move here in a huge way into non-comedy genre stuff. It's a bit of an unproven, right? Like I think it's amazing, right, that buyers are so willing to step up to the level that we're talking about with a dozen new series based on video games. Netflix had the action thing, which was based on a video game, and I think that confirmed their thinking around video games. So there's all this upcoming video game stuff, and there's this overall trend of, on top of it, the whole anime kind of trend. I think all those things kind of led us to this place where we're going to see the adult animation category really, become not just a medium for consuming comedy, but a medium for consuming all types of genres. And it's going to, I think it'll rival the size of the anime business, 5 to 10 years from now, that all these Western studios will be doing all kinds of non-comedy animated stuff. And it just means a lot of, I think, fun, cool, new, stuff. It's almost like if I was pitching stuff these days, I'd find like something like really genre and focus on that, get a good writing team built in around it, and package it up. That would be my instinct about where the opportunity is right now, particularly if you're like coming from outside the U.S. Like I know all the studios in the U.S. are just like loaded to the gills, like they're just maxed out. Whenever I talk to them, they don't need more business. They need more talent.
Yeah, it's interesting how like supply constrained this is.
Yeah.
So one of the references that you mentioned was BoJack Horseman, and that show's really interesting to me because it pulls in a lot of conventions from animated sitcoms and subverts the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's kind of meta, right? Like that's kind of what's going on with the animated series in general. That it's supplanted the sitcom. That really the animated series is the way that American audiences now consume their comedy. They don't watch live action sitcoms. There's no such a thing. I cannot name. Can you, Toon Boom Mike, name your favorite current live action sitcom?
I'm sad because The Good Place ended.
Yeah. Yeah, like you mentioned before, right? Schitt's Creek, I love that show. Um, uh, Brooklyn. Um, what am I trying to say here? Brooklyn
Nine
Nine
Nine.
Nine Nine. I was going to say Reno 911. Brooklyn Nine Nine is they're not making it anymore. None of those series. So I think whereas if you say I'd like to see what's on air right now, like animated comedy, and it'll come up with Archer and Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites and this whole long list of stuff. And that's how Americans consume their comedy. I don't know if it's like the great juvenilization. Is that the right word? What's the proper word for that?
Huh.
Of Americans' tastes, but and I don't know how much of this is just fashion, right? Like the Western fell out of fashion. Is it just simply that the sitcom fell out of fashion, or was it too
So
still of a format?
it's funny you mentioned that because we just got a question in the chat. This is coming from Sampler Collywobble, and they're asking, do you think the stigma of animation being childish has inhibited the growth of adult animation to genres outside of comedy until recently?
Without a doubt. I mean, I think that is absolutely, you know, the case that people perceived animation as a child's medium, media. And again, we've been breaking that mold for a while now, and so it's not. We've got to a point here where I think the world is ready to accept animation as can deliver any kind of show. But sometimes these things are funny, right? Like you think about the history of television, and you have like the uh, whatchamacallit format, the help me out here, the game shows and reality TV. Sorry, I was just escaping me. You think about
Yeah.
the fashion of reality TV. Well, one day there wasn't reality TV, and the next day there was. Like it just sometimes these things are funny like that, and they're usually um, driven by either technology. These changes are driven by technology, or they're driven by cost. In the case of reality TV, that's driven by cost, right? They figured, oh crap, we can create these dumbass shows that people will watch forever for nothing, and so let's do more of that, right? That was the reality phenomenon. I remember very clearly the first time some of those reality shows showed up, thinking like how unique they were. Now to think about it's laughable, but because they're so formulaic. But similarly, like, have we got to a place where I was watching the trailer for Invincible, right? This is the new animated series coming out from Robert Kirkman, the guy from Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And it's so unusual looking series because it's sort of a fairly straight on handling of the comic book that I have a good feeling about that particular series, that it's going to, I think, open people's eyes to consuming, because it'll get really violent just by its very nature, right? Like that show, even though the trailer looked kind of like very civilized and buttoned down, but I got to believe that they get kind of crazy in that thing. So that's a series that will be one of those series that sort of, I think, well, I guess Harley Quinn too is another kind of comic book based property that's really gained momentum, gained an audience, and is legitimately hilarious. That will open up that comic book world to
Yeah,
anime.
I think it's really interesting that when you think about all of the major blockbusters from the past decade and a half, so many of them were superhero comics. And it's interesting that superhero genre sort of spin-offs are a way that animation is branching out too.
Yeah, it is, right. It's just it's funny, right? Because it seems fairly obvious to do, and why didn't it happen earlier? And maybe it's a combination of consumers not ready, but as much as anything, buyers aren't ready, right? Like they haven't kind of come around to, oh shoot, that this would actually work, and this is a pretty neat way to, Kirkman himself said about Invincible that he wanted to make it animated because he wanted to differentiate from all the other live action series. He just felt there was too many, and you get lost in all of that, and how can you do something different?
I mean, Amazon also has The Boys.
Yeah.
Which is a very violent superhero series. But I want to also talk about another trend that I saw. So The Simpsons and Family Guy, these are both shows that are mainstays of primetime TV. They both have multiple decades under their belts. But why does it seem like adult animated sitcoms are suddenly everywhere?
Uh, do you mean like what I'm seeing is more
Oh,
hybrid?
family sitcoms.
I see more hybrid um, comedy, hybrid comedy, sci-fi. That's
Okay,
what.
so like the shows like Futurama, Rick and Morty, Final Space, Star Trek Lower Decks.
Yeah. All those. I think I consider those like kind of crossover shows that are more ambitious than a straight up comedy. Oftentimes they deal with like the human condition, and they're very thoughtful and playful. They're also really plastic. You can put them anywhere. They can sail across the universe and back. They can turn into a tree and a a lawnmower. So um, uh, at that level, like it's a more dynamic way of storytelling than a sitcom, which is very traditional. Uh, even the run times on a sitcom are forced, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, because I don't know that I'm seeing like the sitcom format is still, it's not going away, right? Comedy's not going away. So everything I'm talking about right now is kind of additive. Like comedy,
Yeah.
if anything, comedy is the new way. Like an animated comedy is the new way that people consume their comedy. So that's going to be around for a while. I don't know if that gets at what you were
Yeah,
asking.
I think maybe a better question to ask would be why do you feel that animated sitcoms have supplanted live action sitcoms? And not just because of particular issues with live action production this year.
Oh yeah, I think it's just I think it's a little bit of, like it's just fashion. Like they've fallen out of fashion. The sitcom, before even animation came along, I think that the animated sitcom was in decline. And you had like Arrested Development and these kind of shows that like you couldn't really easily define. Um, and so there's the fashion. It was falling out of fashion. But also with animation, you can again uh, explore ideas and play around with characters and situation and location and everything that you just can't do with a sitcom. And it doesn't cost that much, relatively speaking, right? Like to fly around the universe in animation compared to the sitcom. Does that
I
answer your
mean,
question?
yeah, it's funny because like there are certain things that are easier in animation. You can put a character in outer space. There are certain things that are really hard in animation. Like in live action, if you just want to have a bunch of extras in a scene, you hire people and they mumble things in the background. Peas and carrots, peas and carrots. With animation, every incidental background character is another thing that someone has to draw.
Well, that's true. That's fair. Movies put people in space because they want them in a tin can, and they don't have to get around too much. Like that's a trick that they use. Um, but for animation, I think again it's just a sort of latitude you've got that you don't have necessarily with live action. Also, if you think about the durability of like The Simpsons or something, right? Those characters
Oh
never
yeah.
age a day in their lives. They're the same age from the moment the series started, and that's partly what allows them to be so durable, right? Like so lasting. They're the longest lasting scripted programming on television. Simpsons and Family Guy.
With a lot of the original cast still.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what the neat thing there is that for them they just show up for their VO sessions and they're done type of thing, right? So it's not like they all have to go on location, in Sri Lanka for a month, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about the crossover between sci-fi comedy is why is that such a compelling thing for audiences and networks? Is it because it's still comedy, so it's familiar, and then it's a little bit of genre, so they're able to ride some of the wave of genre and explore different themes?
I think you kind of described it. It's just that it's a little bit more than just a family sitting around their couch, experiencing family stuff. It's challenging to think about time and space and other cultures and all the stuff that comes with sci-fi that has always made sci-fi great. What's funny about it though is that if you think about it, right, sci-fi, it's not really like a comedic vehicle when you're watching most sci-fi, right? Like it's like or reading a sci-fi novel. There's a few I'm sure that are funny, but it's not. You don't link those two up. For somehow in animation world, those two got linked up, and there's probably a dozen sci-fi comedies at the moment, probably another dozen in development, and it seems to be the flavor du jour, for buyers. I think it's a little overdone. It might also just be like the success of things like Rick and Morty. They had this ripple effect, and it just ripples through like other studios that even subconsciously don't even know that they're basically picking up on some of those themes and like working them into their projects. I would avoid it personally. I think it's kind of a little overwrought at the moment, and um, not. I wouldn't take a sci-fi comedy out to market at the moment.
When everybody zigs, there's a temptation to zig too, but sometimes you want to do something different and not get lost in the crowd. Yeah, that,
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense. So looking beyond comedy, what are some of the source materials that you broadly see adult animation pitches drawing from?
Um, the new one on the street is board games. Right? They just announced Clue, the old board game. I have my doubts about that. I'm just saying. I hope there's nobody on the call working on Clue. Um, and there's also obviously the name's going to escape me. The big Kickstarter raise one. What was that one called, Mike?
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you about it, but one record-breaking Kickstarter campaign was for an animated series from Critical Role,
yeah,
based on an actual play Dungeons and Dragons campaign on Twitch.
yeah, and they crushed it. Right now, they had a big social media footprint prior to that. All watching these, you know, actors read their line or not read their lines, but
It's all improv. Yeah.
yeah. And so I'm a big fan of these kind of what I call seed formats, like in that case, like improv on social, but it could be anything from a podcast to animated short format stuff. Like there was also the Has Been Hotel that got picked up by A24 as a series. That was originated as a short. So I like these mediums where you can prove out sort of the audiences around these characters, and then frankly go to crowdfunding to source money and go much more indie route than all the way we've been historically like talking in this conversation. It's been all about selling to the streamers and cable guys and the broadcasters and stuff like that. But I do think there's a pathway here for crowdfunding stuff. If you've got the ability to sort of creatively take care of stuff like, without third party funding sources or a publisher involved or a buyer, you can build stuff up to scale and crowdfund. So I like that model. I the question though was like the sources of IP, right? So we covered off kind of those seed formats that I like, but then there's also obviously comic books are a big one, video games are the other, and a lot of kind of like crazy major IP like there's an animated series coming out about with Godzilla and Blade Runner and Game of Thrones is the rumor. Um, these are like some of the biggest IP around, right? And they're all doing animated versions of them, and part of the paper talks about why is that, right? Like, why all these spin-offs all of a sudden and reboots? And the thesis is that it's because it can do less damage to the IP than a live action spin-off, because storylines can divert from maybe the themes you want to go with the movies. It's not as kind of, it's considered like its own, green shoot that is, you have more latitude, more flexibility to do more creative things around the IP than you might if you try to do like a live action TV series or a movie. So this has opened up a whole new category of reboots and spin-offs that literally didn't exist before. I mean, there's very few reboots and spin-offs that I can think of, with the possible exception of like some comic book spin-offs, like, Batman series and that kind of thing, animated series. So that's a big one. We covered out video games, comic books, reboots, spin-offs, and anime. Those are like, I think the big, and of course originals. Originals still count for 50% of all the new shows.
Yeah. Well, we have a question from producer Derek. So Derek is asking, he knows that your white paper doesn't cover adult animation in film, but with the way the industry is trending, do you think there'll be an opportunity for adult animation to be less of a niche in feature film?
Well, I'm not seeing it yet. Although, did you notice that the first thing to go at Sundance was an animated feature,
Hmm.
an adult animated feature, but it's still, I think, a little bit unclear, uh, your pathway to, and it's partly because everything's so murky right now with theatrical in general. People just don't have a good feel for, like, is it all going to be on the streamers? Is there going to even be a theatrical? Will theatrical rebound? So there's so many unknowns there at the moment that I think I don't have a clear picture of it, and I don't think I'm alone. Like, it's just murky in general. Not anything to do in a way with adult animation, but just the theatrical business in general. It's also like, the movies that work well in indie produced animation or excuse me, indie produced, like they're horrors and documentaries. And if you can find a sweet spot to like make an animated movie for 2 million or something like that, you might be able to find like, a category that makes sense for film. But right now, like, that's about like that my knowledge of that category is that you just heard it there. Like, I haven't thought about it much more than that. Other than I do anticipate it will become increasingly important, right?
Yeah.
Especially with this consumer acceptance of animation in general growing exponentially, it's just inevitable it's going to end up in film, and some of these. But I haven't seen like guys saying, "Oh, I haven't heard Netflix announce we're going to buy 10 adult animated features." I haven't heard any of that yet.
Hmm. So, John, based on the trends that you've seen, how do you think the adult animation corner of the industry will grow or develop?
It will get, comedy will continue to, crush it. Um, Genre, non-comedy genre will be additive and quite large. Like, it will actually, I think, in the end, be bigger than comedy. Um, so you're going to see, year over year growth. The streamers' appetite will only grow for this, as because I think it's falling into fashion. It's almost like, we talked about this before, but like, geek culture used to be geek culture, but now geek culture is a lot more mainstream. It's a lot cooler. It's cool to be a geek, and I think this sort of plays into that sort of Comic Con culture and all that. That this is only going to continue to grow, and so you're going to see, I think, just a lot more non-comedy genre stuff, and you're going to see a lot more international stuff, I hope. I'd love to see more stuff out of countries like France, Canada, the UK. Um, and so you're going to see more people feeding into the adult animation from outside the US. You're going to see, I think, a lot of fails because the dilution that's occurred with this fast of growth. But you're also going to see some huge wins in there. Some of this stuff where people are there's a willingness to buy more, interesting, differentiated stuff and smarter stuff, and bringing over talent from live action writing talent into the picture. The voice talent in general is really notched up from where it used to be. It used to be that most adult animation was, with the exception of the Fox stuff, was unknowns almost. Nowadays it's much more star driven, and so I think you're going to see that, and you're going to see what I'm not sure about is 3D. Like it's not very fashionable to do adult animation in 3D, but some of the new stuff, the video game stuff, is 3D. So it's gonna be interesting to see whether that works or not, because audiences have grown so accustomed to watching 3D in their video games, the cinematics and stuff like that. So some of those will be in 3D. I'm very curious to see whether those work or not. It's kind of interesting that 2D seems to work so well for adults, and it's not the fashion. It still happens, obviously, in kids, but there's so much more 3D for kids. I don't know if you've thought about that at all, Mike, or like, because you guys
Yeah,
are for that, right? You're servicing 2D guys, and
we have an interest in that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think part of it might be just that there's more of a pipeline for 2D animation for these price points and budgets.
yeah. You think it's just monetary? I think it's something else. I think that it's hard to get emotive, expressive characters out of
Mm.
3D, and there's a willingness to, like, there's a more physicality in kids animation, so it sort of can get away with it. Whereas in 2D, it's more about the nuance of an expression, or it's just a little bit more nuanced, kind of.
I think you can also like a lot of adult animation sort of embraces almost like an underground comics aesthetic, which is a little bit rougher. And I don't know how you do that in 3D. I'm sure there are great ways to do it,
You know,
but that's not my area of expertise.
you're 100% right on that. That like I bought a lot of stuff right over the years at Mondo, and you always look for that scruffiness. Like if anything was a little too slick, it was like, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Like, can we rough it up a bit? Like, um, although there was the exceptions to that rule. Like Deep Space 69 was a series that was a very clean series, but it was hilarious and it worked really well. So it's not an ironclad rule that you can't have like clean animation that works for adults.
Hmm. We got another question in the chat, and I think this is an interesting one. Where do you think the biggest demand is for adult animation right now?
I think the streamers are competing for eyeballs, and they know from their research that this stuff works, and it's like an arms race. Netflix has said out loud, "We want to take on Disney." Now they mean like kids, when they say that, but they're very ambitious in terms of their adult animation strategy. You can see it from the way they're ordering. Similarly, HBO Max, and I don't think that Hulu had a long history of doing adult animation, right? Amazon's met with some success, and I just think anybody that's trying to hit 18 to 34s and is going to lean into animation as one way to do that. And so I would say that that's where you're going to see most of the growth, and you're going to see them expanding internationally. And so that's going to pull even more on these shows that aren't the comedies, that are more genre stuff, because they'll export better. And if you're HBO Max, in Latin America, and you can just revoice this animated series, and it works, that's going to be huge, right? Like a dramatic thing, like a horror or an action thing or something. And so I think that's where the demand is going to. Do you think that gets at the answer, Mike? That what they were trying to ask the person?
I
Or
think so, yeah, because that shows like different domains in which there's demand for adult animation. I can see that we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you, where can our viewers find you on the web or contact you for consulting?
the best bet is to just find me on LinkedIn, quite honestly. I look at LinkedIn, very regularly. And if you want to, if you reach me there, I also have a website called highconcentrate.com, just like it sounds, high concentrate, all one word. And that also has the ability to, you have the ability to reach out to me. And my email is published in those places. And anybody that doesn't have my email, I'm happy to share it. It's J Evershed, just the letter J, my last name, Evershed, at highconcentrate.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for today's interview. Toon Boom is really excited to sponsor the updated adult animation white paper, so keep an eye out on our website as we'll have more to announce soon. If you're interested in reading interviews with artists and animators behind adult animated projects, also keep an eye on the Toon Boom blog, which you can find on the web at blog.toonboom.com. We have published interviews with artists like Fable Siegel for their work on Lackadaisy, Spencer Wan on the animated trailer for Hades by Supergiant Games. And we really look forward to some of the other articles we'll be publishing soon. Until next time.